welcome back to Community Couch Time, a daily talk show where we talk about things that are important, things that are happening in our community and our state, in this country, and internationally. Oftentimes, the topics that we discuss are ones that others aren't talking about. And the question is, why aren't we? Hello, and welcome back to Community Couch Time. Today, we have a very good friend of ours, Nicolas Valdez. Nicolas is a San Antonio-based interdisciplinary performing artist. His work focuses on the experience of the communities along the U.S.-Mexico border. His latest production, Conjunto Blues, explores the historical and social conditions that led to the development of conjunto music as an expression of cultural resistance and liberation. He is also a founding member of Los Nahuatlatos, whose music they describe as Xicano-Roots-Fusion. And so all of the ways that you can contact him through their websites and all of that will be in the comments section so that folks can stay in touch. So Nicolas, how are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for being here. Really, the first thing I really wanted to ask you, and just so everyone out there can get to know a little bit more about who you are, is just a little bit about your upbringing and how that brought you to conjunto music.
Of course. Well, I grew up here in San Antonio, Texas, and San Antonio, with its proximity to the border, has always been sort of a mecca for Chicano music. And I was very fortunate, I think, to be able to grow up in this environment where that music and culture was so accessible. My family, I don't come from a legacy of musicians. My father's actually a professor of sociology, sort of an intellectual. My mother is a retired dual language teacher in the public school system. She taught elementary school. And so it was really my grandfather who was the one who introduced me to conjunto music at a very young age. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, and it was really through that relationship, tagging along with them to the bailes at the VFW halls and experiencing that for the first time through my father, really, and his involvement with the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center here in San Antonio. Was where I first had the opportunity to take lessons, accordion lessons. Wow. The Guadalupe's Chicano music program was the first in the country to offer accordion classes. I think, accordion traditionally and conjunto music as a genre was always something that was very much passed through, like our oral traditions, family members or neighbors, and that kind of barrio connection. The Guadalupe gave the general public the first opportunity to take accordion lessons and learn traditional conjunto music. And so I, at 8 years old, was introduced to Mr. Valerio Longoria Sr., who was a pioneer in conjunto music, and he was my first instructor. I have to admit that, it wasn't the most exciting thing for me at the time. I mean, the accordion was much bigger than me, so I struggled to even hold it. And I was really intimidated by Valerio, who was just sort of a really big personality and old school, and a little aggressive and push pull. He would hit your hands if you messed up, and it was really intimidating. And it wasn't exactly the coolest thing at that time either, right? I think most people's references to accordion music was like Steve Urkel from Family Ties, So I think initially it was a little difficult, and I was a little resistant, until I really started seeing the impact that it had in my relationships, especially with my grandparents and their generation. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents, my grandfather in particular, was just so absolutely proud of the fact that I could play a couple of tunes, a couple of polkas on the accordion. Wow. And he would take me to the barrio and that he grew up in to go visit all his compadres and comadres. And I think that's where I really began to gain an appreciation for the power of this music and the power of the tradition, to see their reactions. It was really incredible. And And then, then I got to have my first taste of like public performance, which was also very nerve-wracking, but intoxicating in its own way. As a kid, standing up on stage and receiving all of that energy for the first time, I was pretty hooked, I think, after that. And I continued to take lessons through the Guadalupe, eventually took lessons with other musicians in the area. I had received actually a grant when I was about 14 or 15 through the Texas Folk Life organization, and they gave me an opportunity to work with another accordion master, Fred Zimmerly. And so yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate again to be here in San Antonio, which is sort of the ground zero for conjunto music.
Yeah, for sure.
And then my relationship with the accordion and with the Guadalupe Center, I had the opportunity to join their resident youth theater company, Grupo Animo. And I think at that time I was about 13. And that was really the first time that my music world and this theater world came together. It was a really wonderful program that actually is still continuing. I've been a co-instructing Grupo Animo during the summers for the past, I think we just finished our 7th year. So, the program allowed the students to create their own work. We worked with visiting guest directors, but the content of the show was all based on conversations that we had and exploring, youth issues that were relevant to us at the time. And that was a very empowering experience, and I think a very unique experience. It's not something that a lot of folks my age at that time had the opportunity to do, and it set the course for me and then the rest of my performance life. I think I often tell people that I do theater, and I'm not sure how many people understand immediately that, like, I'm not doing Broadway, off-Broadway production. Like, although I'd love to get my work there, right? The kind of theater that I did came from that school of Teatro that was a legacy of Teatro Campesino and Nicolas Valdez. That was, theater with a sense of urgency, that spoke to current issues and political issues, that spoke about our cultura and our history. And that's the kind of work that I continue to do, right? And I think especially work that helps us reclaim our historical narratives that have been robbed of us for so long. And there's so many rich stories in our communities. And I think the focus at the end of the day, the work that I do, is to encourage people to tell their own stories. We unpackage some historical traumas, and we ask some difficult questions. I can't imagine that because of Conjunto Blues, it's going to like change the world, right? But I think that it can help give folks the confidence to tell their own stories. And I think that's, I think for me, at the end of the day, is the goal, right? Is to empower us to be able to take pride in our histories and our stories, and that they are relevant, right? And that we demand to see more of them, that more of us are represented in the places that we go and watch TV and listen to whatever, right? Like all media sources. We're still very, very, very much underrepresented in all of these places. So we just continue to swing away and try to get a foot in the door.
You already brought up Conjunto Blues. Can you tell us a little bit about this one-person show? Tell us, what it is and what folks can get from that in terms of like what you said in your bio, right? Liberation and resistance. How is Conjunto Blues that? Yeah.
Well, just briefly, like on the production itself, the story is a one-person performance. In the version that I did recently, that's a filmed version, I have a full conjunto band that lives in the back of the stage, which includes upright bass, the tololoche, the bajo sexto, which is the traditional accompaniment to the accordion, which is a 12-string Mexican guitar, the bateria, and then of course the accordion, which is the traditional conjunto band setup, right? But the show is about my experiences around my grandparents, right? And the whole show is kind of a conversation between me and family members as a young child. Although you never see the child in the show, I play all of the other characters, which include like my grandparents, my great-grandmother, my first accordion instructor, a couple of other, characters in the show. But yeah, I mean, there's kind of like conjunto, I think, is really important in the narrative of the Mexican American experience. I mean, the introduction of the accordion, right, came to Texas through Germanic immigration around the mid 1800s, 1830s or so. And there was a lot of Mexicanos at that point working on their farms, right? This was after the, a lot of the right, geopolitics that stripped Mexicanos of their land and of their power. And so at that point, we were really kind of just struggling and working on other people's land at this point, right? And we heard the accordion, adopted the accordion, and mixed it with the corrido tradition of Mexico and started creating our own music. And the accordion, because it was sort of a mobile instrument, it had your both bass and your treble sides. You could do a lot with one instrument, as opposed to these orquestas that required horns and strings and all kinds of stuff. It was like a compact thing. So it was very much working class music, right? It was very much la música de la gente, del pobre, right? And I think that kind of stayed, that idea of it being working music or poor people's music, I think kind of haunted conjunto music for a long time. But nonetheless, this style developed and then followed, all of the migrant routes of the 20s and 30s, where the work was, the musicals were going, right? And then after World War II, I think people came back and started establishing communities and middle-class communities throughout, the Southwest and the Midwest. And then you had nightclubs popping up, right? And so, the whole development of this sort of Mexican-American working class, the accordion was there the whole time, and was really kind of like telling the story, right? Telling I like to consider some of the early conjunto musicians and lyricists, like they were like the first barrio street poets, talking about realities that were going on in their daily lives that weren't explored, I think, in other areas and sort of regular, wasn't dinner table conversations, right? And so the music, conjunto music, and lyrically, has always been a reflection of issues going on within the community, which is why I named the show Conjunto Blues, right? It's like our own version of the blues. It's about this working class struggle and reclaiming, right, spaces. I think that's one of the important parts of conjunto music, right? Is that we had to find these spaces, create these spaces where we felt safe, right? Where we could speak in our own language. And a lot of times that is that Spanglish kind of code switching. I mean, that's where we're comfortable, right?
Totally.
Where we could reinforce all of our cultural values. We could practice all those important rites of passage, the birthdays and weddings and quinceañeras and all those things that are fundamental, to creating community, right? And that, translated again, like into nightclubs, right? Where we were opening up, the first dance halls in the Midwest and areas, so it was a way to empower ourselves, right? And then, I mean, not to mention all the other aspects that, getting dressed up, and going to the show, right? Like that sense of pride and style, the pachuco, the tacuache, right? We celebrated all of our colorfulness in these spaces. But then I think that, it became, I think, after like my generation growing up, and I think even a little bit of my parents' generation, they started really pulling away from this like Mexican music, right? Yeah. It's too Mexican, or I'm they were listening to rock and roll and the Rolling Stones, but what I'm seeing now is this generation, this younger generation, really embracing these roots again, and I guess time is cyclical. Things work like that. I mean, the whole Chicano doo-wop scene is definitely coming back, like, but I see people too, like, younger folks, like really celebrating and enjoying the music and dancing together and stuff. And so that is encouraging, I think, to see now that we're coming back to a place where we're looking for that connection that we lost. A lot of us, grew up not really speaking Spanish, right? And not really understanding or celebrating those cultural roots. And this resurgence, I think, is has a lot of credit to do with these cultural arts organizations like the Guadalupe throughout the country that have really strived to continue these traditions, right? And that's part of this Conjunto Blues as well, right? It's really about honoring, celebrating, and passing on, these traditions, these legacies, and the values too, right? I mean, that was a big part of what I grew up listening to. My grandparents instilling hard work, ethic, right? And the value of community. Those things, we need to preserve. Now, there's certain aspects, of course, culture that we have to be critical of as well, yeah. Right? All of the machismo and all of that stuff that, holds us back. Right. So, I think that there's a way to preserve what is valuable and what is fruitful, right? And continue to question all the other things that inhibit us, right? And
I love that. I love that you said that, because that's what's beautiful about even like ethnic studies, where we're looking into our ancestors and the ancestral knowledge, but at the same time, we've had time to really think about the things that do need to change, right? Like the machismo or anti-Blackness. So I love that you bring that up. So for you as a musician right now, I mean, you're a young musician. I really appreciate that you're keeping this ancestral music alive, because you brought up Urkel earlier, but when I think of the accordion, I don't think of Urkel. Honestly, I think of like my grandparents. It has such a warm feeling. And I know I've taken students to go see Conjunto Blues, right. And I know my students have shared that before, and even their parents, that seeing your performance gave them a very comfortable home feeling, the music of their familia. And so I really love that you're keeping that alive for the next generations. What other like young up and coming musicians are doing that similar sort of like bringing back like the older traditions, but in a new vibrant way, that you would recommend folks to listen to?
Well, I mean, I there's a lot actually. I think like the son jarocho movement is really interesting, I mean, and folks have really embraced that. And that has sparked, like the LA folks, right? The La Santa Cecilia, I mean, they've really gotten themselves onto a larger stage. And they came from not necessarily just that tradition, but, this, the corrido in Spanish, like romance music, right? And they've modernized that and they've made it accessible. They're like Grammy award-winning, band. They're amazing. And then, Las Cafeteras are local, right? They've done the jarana stuff and evolved with that. Here in the Texas region, there's several bands, that are, we're all homies. Everybody, of course, you're right. Everybody all knows each other. Yeah. But I mean, I think one of the youngest up and coming bands are doing like tropical music, man, in a really amazing way is Volcan. Bombasta, they've been here for a long time. There's a band that we used to play with a lot, Los de Esta Noche. So yeah, I mean, there's really a handful. There's some other friends of mine in LA that I really enjoy. The bigger band that I know of they're called the California Feetwarmers, but these guys are all like ethnomusicologists, and they play so many varieties of music, but they're like historians almost, right? And they play all of this really rootsy and folk music, including they have a conjunto project, which I think is really cool. So yeah, I mean, I really do see a lot of folks embracing the music that they may have shunned, when they were younger, right? But like the whole cumbia scene, forget it. The cumbia is, out the roof.
Yeah, for sure. And Los Nahuatlatos, tell us a little bit about them, about y'all.
Well, so yeah, so the band that I am a part of and have been a member of for the past, I think we said now it's going on 12 years. We started off as a small group, kind of figuring out what our sound was. We did do some son jarocho, we did some conjunto, we did some cumbia, even a little bit of house music, and the band over the past 10 odd years has really evolved, I think, in our sound. Chicano-Roots-Fusion, right? It's always really confusing for people. What does that mean? I mean, it basically means that we just celebrate all of the music that we enjoy listening to. So, we play reggae, hip hop, ska, cumbia, conjunto, a little bit of like rock and roll and funk and all, as kind of schizophrenic as it sounds, we've developed a cohesive sound for ourselves that I think is like pretty unique in what we do. And we've released 2 albums, and you can find those on Spotify. So if you look up Los Nahuatlatos, which is spelled like Nahuatl, like idioma Azteca, right? The body of language spoken in Mesoamerica for thousands of years. And it comes from Nahuatlatos was what they would call people that would translate Spanish to Nahuatl and vice versa. So we're sort of, we call ourselves the interpreters is basically what it means.
Yo, we're Los Nahuatlatos, and this is original Chicano music from Sananto.
In the body of Sananto, there is a story that is often told. In the body of Sananto, there is a story that is often
Yeah, I love that. And so is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about just the power of music and like you said, like how it connects to us as Chicano people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, the música has always been a place where we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And I think like, especially for men, and it's kind of ironic, right? Where they sing these beautiful romantic songs and como sufro por tu amor y todo, right? And then they're just like, real hard, straight-faced, outside of the of their music. But it is a place, right, where especially for, I think, like us as Los Nahuatlatos, we get to talk, we're sort of stay on message, right? We explore issues about the barrio, and it's not all romantic and beautiful. We have issues that we need to deal with amongst ourselves, and we are able to kind of approach some of these things in a way that is accessible and fun and entertaining, right? And so you may be dancing a cumbia and you're like, oh man, this is a great song, right? But if you listen to the lyrics, it's like about a young a tecato in the barrio who's like messed with the wrong people. Like that's one of our songs, right? So but yeah, I mean, the music and is a way to bring attention to things and to empower ourselves, and always has been.
It's a great teaching tool. Thank you so much. So before we say goodbye, can you play something for us?
Claro que sí. I'm gonna take these. This is an original, but it's a very sort of traditional sounding thing.
Bravo. Thank you, Nicolas.
Of course.
It's wonderful having you here. Thank you.
Gracias a usted.
In Latkes, everybody.
In Latkes.
Dang, Nicolas got down. I so appreciate him, and I also appreciate how there is a young movement of BIPOC and Native artivists who are fusing ancestral traditional music with modern rhythms and topics that bring awareness to our communities. So, for your community couch time discussion question, I'd like you to research a current day BIPOC or Native artist or band that is doing just that. Who are they? And what is their message? Enlighten us and in Latkes.